Today we're going to be talking about Lesson 9 of Family Seasons, Sabbath School lesson, Times of Loss.
I want to jump to loss of trust, betrayal, that kind of loss, which, as I mentioned, I've been divorced. I have lots of loss of trust issues. And there's a text that David wrote this, but I believe it is probably something that Jesus would pertain to Jesus as well. Because if you read the Bible, you'll see David is considered a prophet. He prophesied things. One of the things, Psalm 55, verses 12 to 14 and 16 to 22. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, "If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe was raising himself against me, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship as we walked with the throng at the house of God. But I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He ransoms me unharmed from the battle waged against me," and so on. The lesson talks about whether you should try to save a relationship that's broken by trust issues, or try to restore and heal. And that's a totally individual thing. People standing outside of a relationship have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. I remember one time I was somewhere, and this older minister, when he found out I was getting a divorce, he said, "What can we do to help you young people not get divorced," and all that. But unfortunately, I do a lot of body language watching. I used to be in sales at one point. And unfortunately, he had demonstrated to me some really interesting things, one of which was a total disregard for his wife. So I said, "I just really think the best thing you could do is to be a good role model for a man who really loves his wife and cherishes her, and that role model will be something that the younger people can appreciate and look up to." As it turns out, this guy really didn't love his wife. He wanted to become a minister, and in his day, you couldn't become a minister unless you were married. So he just picked somebody. But he treated her with total disdain. And I thought, you don't know anything about my situation. You don't know anything about what I've been through, and you're judging me for something you don't know anything about. And in judging me, you're totally missing what's going on in your own backyard here, It's really tempting to judge other people when they're going through tough times. What's wrong? I'm old enough now where I remember divorce was just something like, "Oh, what's wrong with them? You just didn't do it, And now it's the question at alumni weekend is, have you been married? It's the sort of, well, this is my second marriage or third or whatever. So whether a relationship can be salvaged or not is totally an individual thing. It takes two, There's several verses on forgiving that the lesson gives. Humble yourself, forgive. There's no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. But I will say that some people are an internally burning fire, shall we say. They were wounded in their childhood, never healed, never came to God. Everyone who gets close to them will be hurt by them. If you're married to them or dating them or whatever, if you get close enough, you will be hurt. You will be hurt emotionally or physically or some other way. You will be betrayed. You try what you can. You think, well, I'm smart, they're smart, we can work this out. But as the years go by, things get worse instead of better. And counseling, in my case, right during counseling, there was an affair going on. It was like, okay, we can see that the best efforts are not going on here. But what if you do have something salvageable? What if both of you really want to work towards to repair the broken trust. It's a step-by-step journey. I mean, it's one step forward, two steps back. The trust is always hard to mend. It's better never to have broken trust. In sales, it was better never to have had a bad impression. Once something bad happened in sales, then you had to work so much harder to regain a customer's trust. It was far better to make a good impression and do the right thing the first time, because broken trust is very difficult. So in case there's various things that you can use to help. And I know in some religious circles, counseling is not really the thing we want to talk about, but I do. As a case manager, I had a lot of patients who needed counseling. And my first response when I would bring it up, people would go, "I'm not crazy." But my response to them, and this is the way I truly look at it, there isn't one single thing you know now that somebody didn't teach you. When you were born, you knew nothing. Everything you learned, and somebody you learned it by watching other people, how they handled situations, maybe by reading, maybe something, your experience. But say you've got these 3 cards in your hand, and then you're playing the cards, like this bad thing happens, okay, I'll do this, I'll do that. And then one day something really bad happens, and the cards don't work anymore. And you're like, keep playing the cards even more and more, and they still don't work. You are not resolving an issue, you are not being healed. So I tell people, counselors, people who go into that area, they go to school for years to try to learn other cards to play. So that when you go to counseling, look at it as, I want to gain other cards to play in life. These 3 cards I have are not sufficient anymore. Go get some other cards. And people will say, well, I could do that. If it has always been the thought, you're crazy, no, you're just, situations have happened in life that you don't have the coping skills for. You don't know how to handle the situation. So get some more cards. And the best way to do that, prayer, obviously, talking with people you trust, people with experience. Many times, if you're very careful about who you choose as friends, you'll find they've been through things in life you never knew they'd been through. But because you're honest with them, they bring out these things and they tell you what they used, what cards worked in their situation, what brought them through. They're the light you're at the end of your tunnel. And then, when you go through these things, you can be the light at the end of someone else's tunnel. But you have to choose who you talk to carefully, because some people use things against you, and every time they see you, then they think, oh, there's that, they can't get it out of their mind. Then Tuesday's lesson is a loss of trust continued, talking about violence in the home. Sadly, Christian homes are included. Violence is an assault of any kind, verbal, physical, emotional, sexual, active, or passive neglect. Examples in the Bible: Joseph's brothers plotting to kill him, Absalom's gorgeous sister Tamar raped by her half-brother, the king Judah of Ahaz and Manasseh, they sacrificed their children in the fire to the gods. We watch the news and we're horrified, but we only see the tip of the iceberg, because God sees it all. And again, I want to say, his heart is filled with pain. I want to, just before we close, I want to read this poem that was written by Elia Wise back in 19-something. She wrote this poem as part of her recovery from being abused as a child. But I found it very helpful and insightful. I was not abused as a child. I have a hard time understanding that. So this helped me, and I want to share it. For children who were broken, it is very hard to mend. Our pain was rarely spoken, and we hid the truth from friends. Our parents said they loved us, but they didn't act that way. They broke our hearts and stole our worth with the things that they would say. We wanted them to love us. We didn't know what we did to make them yell at us and hit us and wish we weren't their kid. They'd beat us up and scream at us and blame us for their lives. Then they'd hold us close inside their arms and tell us confusing lies about how they really loved us, even though we were bad and it was our fault they hit us, our fault they were mad. When days were just beginning, we sometimes prayed for them to end. And when the pain kept coming, we learned to just pretend that we were good and so were they, and this was just one of those days. Tomorrow, we'd be friends. We had to believe it so. We had nowhere else to go. Each day that we pretended, we replaced reality with lies or dreams or angry schemes in search of dignity until our lies got bigger than the truth and we had no one real to be. Our bodies were forsaken with no safe place to hide. We learned to stop hearing and feeling what they did to our outsides. We tried to make them love us till we hated ourselves instead and couldn't see a way out and wished that they were dead. We scared ourselves by thinking that and scared ourselves to know that we were acting just like them and might evermore be so. To be half the size of a grown-up and trapped inside their pain. To every day lose everything with no savior or refrain. To wonder how it's possible that God could so forget the worthy child you knew you were when you had not been damaged yet. To figure on your fingers that the years till you'd be grown enough to leave the torment and survive away from home were more than you could count to, or more than you could bear, was the reality we lived in, and we knew it wasn't fair. We who grew up broken are somewhat out of time, struggling to mend our childhood when our peers are in their prime. Where others find love and contentment, we still often have to strive to remember we are worthy and heroes just to be alive. Some of us are healing, some are stealing, most are passing the anger on. Some give their lives away to drugs or the promise of life beyond. Some still hide from society, some struggle to belong, but all of us are wishing the past would not hold on so long. There's a lot of digging down to do to find the child within, to love away the ugly pain and feel innocence again. There's forgiveness worthy of angels' wings for remembering those at all who abused our sacred childhood and programmed us to fall. To seek to understand them and how their pain became our own is to risk the ground we stand on to climb the mountain home. The journey is not so lonely as in the past it's been. More of us are strong enough to let the growth begin. But while we're trekking up the mountain, we need everything we've got to face the adults we've become and all that we are not. So when you see us weary from the day's internal climb, when we find fault with your best efforts or treat imperfection as purposeful crime, when you see our quick defenses, our efforts to control, our readiness to form a plan of unrealistic goals, when we run into a conflict and fight to the bitter end, remember, we think winning means we won't be hurt again. When we abandon our thoughts and feelings to be what we believe you want us to, or look at trouble we're having and want to blame it all on you, when life calls for new beginnings and we fear they're doomed to end, remember, wounded trust is like a wounded knee. It is very hard to bend. Please remember this when we're out of sorts. Tell us the truth and be our friend. For children who were broken, it is very hard to mend. Let's pray.